In and out of the Beltway. From large cities to small towns to the rural heartland. From sea to shining sea. This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. Inside the News.
Welcome back to another edition of Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. Myself, Guy Wehman, and on your top left, we've got Frank Vernuccio, and in the bottom middle, we've got Ben Brunson. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing just great, gentlemen. It is once again a pleasure to be with you both and to start our show.
Absolutely. And Frank, how you doing?
Another day surviving in the People's Republic of New York.
Yeah, boy, isn't that the truth? Okay, guys, we've got a busy show, and listeners and viewers on YouTube, get ready because this is going to be a busy one today. We're going to start right off with what is going on across the country. We're going to get to COVID, and we're going to get to all of these. But the main topic that I started this thing off is America to the polls. It's the vote for the civilization or non-existence. Frank, did you like that?
Indeed. And, you know, when you watch the news and you hear the statements of many public officials, you have to wonder whether this is not a battle of right versus left, Democrat versus Republican, whether it's a battle of sanity versus madness. When you hear some of the things that are coming from the candidates, when you look at the policies that we're being asked to consider, when you see a section of downtown Seattle that has virtually seceded from the union and the mayor and the governor think that it's a damn fine thing, you've got to wonder what is going on.
You know something, Ben? Frank hit upon something there, that the mayor of Seattle, the governor of Washington State, this is a cancer that's starting to metastasize right there in Washington State and Seattle, and it could very well spread across the country, and it's spreading even into Europe, tearing down of various things. We're going to get into that. But, Ben, your thoughts?
Well, this is a cultural revolution, and there's one side out on the streets and the other side, which I believe to be the vast majority of our country and probably the vast majority of Europe, is remaining silent and choosing not to participate. So when that happens, unfortunately, a very vocal, motivated minority holds sway. Of course, ugly reality tends to crash in on the party. So even Mayor Durkin of Seattle has admitted in recent days that the summer of love needs to come to an end and the authorities need to regain control of the autonomous zone of Chaz. And the ugly reality that has been injected into Chaz is a lot of shootings and a lot of crime that is out of control, and the inability of police forces to enter that autonomous zone when they should. So this whole farce hopefully is starting to lose some steam. It is a hopeful sign when Mayor Durkin admits that things are out of control in the utopia known as Chaz.
You know something, Frank? We all are aware of what happened back in the 60s, and you know, the Summer of Love and the Love Child and all of that kind of stuff, and Woodstock and all. This is far from it, because they say we don't want the police, but yet the police is what they are actually desiring. People are getting shot up there. Now the police cannot get into that zone to actually help. And what they are asking for is kind of what they got, but that's not what they wanted, I don't think, Frank.
Well, if the 1960s guy saw the summer of love, we are currently enduring the summer of hate. If you listen to the messages that we are getting from the left, it is not, let's all get along, let's love each other, let's come together. It's, we hate just about everything. We hate American history. We hate the past. We hate the present leadership. We hate the system of government that we currently have. One of the most telling features, I think, of what we see on the left right now is an abandonment not just of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but of the very concept of law and order itself. When you destroy statues, when you destroy, talk about defunding the police. And by the way, in cities like Chicago and New York, it's fascinating to listen to the mayors of those two great towns. They are saying defund the police, release the criminals from jail because we don't want them to catch COVID. And by the way, don't you dare use a weapon to defend your home, your family, or yourself, which leads to nothing but not anarchy, but a takeover by the criminals. And of course, we've seen this before in history. This is reminiscent of what we saw in the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, what we've seen throughout the world when tyranny prevails. This is the first stage of tyranny.
Boy, you've nailed on something there. Ben, I was talking with a friend of mine and reminded me of some of what the value of the Confederate flag was, and what, it had red, white, and blue, and that the X was merely that they wanted to secede from the Union is what that X stood for. Yes, slavery was a part of it, but there's the economic values of what was going on as well, Ben, and you know some of that history, don't you?
Yes, I am a history buff, that's for sure. And I am a generational Southerner whose ancestors fought in the North Carolina regiments.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, Ben.
And fought on the wrong side. Look, the South was fighting for the wrong cause, and the North was fighting for the right cause. And that's the reality. And I understand the problem that a lot of this country has with the Confederate flag. I do not defend it. I recognize that people have the right to fly that flag if that's what they want to do. It is not something that I would do. And certainly organizations have the right to ban the flag. NASCAR has gone in that direction and probably insulted a big chunk of its fan base in the process. However, I understand NASCAR's decision, and I actually think it's the right one for the sport over the long run. Mm-hmm. So look, the flag is very divisive, and it is time for that flag to largely be retired in this country. And I don't have a problem with that. I felt that way a long time ago. Yeah. So the fact that it's forefront of our politics right now doesn't particularly bother me. But I also respect, just as I respect the right of individuals to burn the U.S. flag, even though it makes me very angry to see that. But it is their individual right, if they own that flag, to burn it and to make that protest, because that is our First Amendment freedom of speech right. It is equally the right of an individual to fly the Confederate flag if that's what they choose to do, even though it is very insulting and hateful to a large chunk of our population. So, but the U.S. flag has become hateful to a large chunk of our population, unfortunately, and I proudly wave that flag. So this is where we're at. This is what our country is about. This is what our Bill of Rights is all about. And we have to keep that front and center. And unfortunately, right now, the mob is destroying our Bill of Rights and attempting to impose a regime or an ideology in which we will have no more rights. We will have no right of free speech, no right of free thought. We will look and feel more like China than otherwise. And that's a very dangerous and horrible place. That's the end of America. And that's really what we're going to be voting to. Which path to take is going to be on the docket in November.
You know something, Frank, they are tearing down these monuments, and you brought that up a little bit. And Washington, they burned his head in the American flag, and Jackson and Madison and Jefferson. And they literally are trying to eliminate any part of our history here in the United States. And yet these men, yes, they might have owned slaves and all, but these men were brilliant in the way that they put up our Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. And yet that's the very thing that these people are fighting against, because their ultimate aim and goal is to destroy America and have it cease to exist, Frank.
I think their ultimate goal is to destroy civilization as we've come to know it. When you have a tyrannical group that wants to take over, they cannot tolerate any instance of conscience, any instance of power, any instance of influence other than themselves, which is why, as we predicted on this show, I think well over a year ago, that eventually tearing down Confederate monuments would lead to tearing down Jefferson and Washington, and eventually tearing down statues of Moses or Jesus, as we've seen just in the past couple of days. Look, you can make the argument, if you want to follow the logic of the left right now, well, Jesus had some influence in his time for a while. He didn't talk about slavery. He didn't talk about throwing after the yoke of Roman oppression. Therefore, he was one of the oppressors. He went along with it. Why don't we tear down his statue? The reality of it is, if you look at the left's entire philosophy, it is meaningless. There's nothing there except tyranny. They cannot stand any center of influence, whether it be religion or history or anything else, nor can they tolerate the truth. And the truth is that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, men of their times, brought about the greatest revolution in human freedom in history. Was it perfect? Damn right it was not. Slavery still existed. It shouldn't have. But you can't undo the world by simply snapping your fingers. As I believe Ben Franklin said at one point, perhaps a kinder God would have given us more opportunity to do this in an easier fashion. But first they had to establish the nation before they could take on all of these evils. Slavery existed throughout the planet. It was not, as the left wants us to believe, a uniquely American problem. It existed throughout the planet. The first step was establishing a new concept of human freedom, which exists in the Bill of Rights. The next step is to extend that freedom to people of all sorts.
Hey, Ben, does taxation without representation kind of go back to 1776 as well? You're our leading economist on this show.
Well, it certainly was a motivating factor in our revolution, that's for sure. But look, the revolution was probably inevitable on one level or another in terms of the revolution against British rule, because we were an ocean apart. And certainly 200 plus years ago, being an ocean apart was culturally being completely disengaged, one culture from the other. So the United States was developing its own culture, and it was on a path that, just like most of the British Empire, initially led to revolution. And the taxation was the one cause of the moment, if you will. But this issue of cultural identity and cultural heritage is so important, and it is why the left, to Frank's point, wants to destroy our cultural heritage and our history, and everything is in the crosshairs at this point, including Christianity. The Shaun King, who is apparently a Black Lives Matter leader, even though he is essentially a white guy who pretends to be black, has called for the destruction of all Christian symbols in this country and all representations of the white Jesus and his European mother. This is where these types of cultural revolutions go. It is no different than the French Revolution. You start with something that a lot of people can agree upon. Nobody is in favor of police brutality, but then the extremists take over, and now everything is being destroyed. And if you don't fight that, you get exactly what Frank alluded to earlier, what happened when the Khmer Rouge took over Cambodia, and the extremism gets to a point where everything is being destroyed, everything is being tossed out, and you have nothing but chaos and death and destruction, and a revolution that will ultimately eat its own. This is not going to happen in this country, but I will say this: there's a very clear choice in November, because one party, the Democratic Party, used to be led by adults. They were deep staters, but they were adults who are rational, who are invested in the system and wanted to perpetuate a system that worked for them. Right now, that party has given way to the radical left, and the radical left is dictating the entire party and their actions. And there is only one opposition to that, and that's the Republican Party. This is a point I heard Tucker Carlson make this point earlier this week. He was exactly right. There's only one viable opposing force left on a political scale, and that's the Republican Party. And right now, that is a very stark choice between the two, and it has nothing to do with Donald Trump or never Trumpers or the Republicans who are rhinos. It has to do with whether there is an opposing force to this current cultural revolution that is running amok in this country.
Well said. This is our first segment here on Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio Inside the News. We've got a talk that we're going to be doing about some of Venezuela. I just heard this in the news, and Ben's going to bring that up, as well as China, the border wall. There's a lot more going on. We're glad that you are joining us, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's our radio affiliates across the country, or on our podcast on SoundCloud. And we're one of those few remaining voices that's willing to say it like it is and give you the truth, and not slant it in one direction or another. And the choice will be clear: civilization or non-existence. We're going to take a break. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.